Welcome to the Babylonian Podcast. I'm Michael Light, and I'm a Second Temple Jewish literature junkie and a big-time Bible nerd. And on this podcast, I provide the perspective of Jews that lived just before Jesus, from texts that we have like the apocrypha, pseudepigrapha, Dead Sea Scrolls, Philo, and more. With scholars, sages, and scriptures, let's Bible on. In this episode of the Babylonian, we are going to be talking about, not even disputably, but just straight up, the most important apocryphon over the most important intertestamental, quote-unquote, event, and that is the Maccabean Revolt. And so, if you couldn't tell which apocrypha we're talking about in this episode, just by the name of the event, we are talking about the one and the only 1 Maccabees. Now, I say 1 Maccabees and not first Maccabees, because if you're reading this in, say, a Catholic Orthodox Bible or in any collection of apocrypha, then you will often read 1 Maccabees and then you'll turn the page to 2 Maccabees and assume that you're reading a continuation of the first story. But that is absolutely not the case. 2 Maccabees is, in fact, retelling a lot of the stories that happen in 1 Maccabees. It's focused in on just one part of the time of what's happening in 1 Maccabees and shows other perspectives and has its own emphases. And then 3 Maccabees talks about a different historical event, and it kind of tells a sort of allegorical kind of story that is very much based on the Maccabees. And then 4 Maccabees is not even a narrative, but it's a treatise on reason and its power over emotions, and it uses the stories of 2 Maccabees to kind of make its arguments for how reason has power over emotions. And so I will, in the future, of course, be making podcast episodes about each of those. However, until then, right now, this is the episode on 1 Maccabees, so I will leave the rest of the content for those 2, 3, and 4 Maccabees for those episodes. But if you get the argument, 1 Maccabees should be called 1 Maccabees and not first Maccabees, because it's not a first part of anything. It's rather one of many different perspectives on the Maccabean Revolt. Further, it's not really that it's 1 Maccabees and then 2 Maccabees. It's rather that it's 1 Maccabees and then 2 Maccabees is zooming in on one part of 1 Maccabees, and then 3 Maccabees is sharing a sort of allegorical version of it, and then 4 Maccabees is a treatise on it. And so it's kind of like 4 different sides of 1 square. And so it shouldn't really be first, second, third, and fourth. It should just be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, anyways, I hope all that makes sense. But we really need to stop calling this first Maccabees. It's not the first of anything, like in the Hebrew Bible where you have 1st and 2nd Samuel, or 1st and 2nd Kings, or 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Those are larger works that are split up into 2. And for the Maccabees, that is not the case at all. Now, I'm reading 1 Maccabees in the NRSV from the New Oxford Annotated Apocrypha, and the scholar that gives an introduction to this is John R. Bartlett, and I have also been listening to the Apocryphals podcast on it, as well as a lecture by David De Silva, who is an Apocrypha scholar. And if you're interested in other resources that I'm consuming on the Apocrypha, you can see all that on my website, michaeljlight.com or thebabylonian.com. It's also in the show notes to this episode. If you go to Works and Writings and scroll down, you'll see a section on the scriptures, sages, and scholars. And if you click that document, you can go to, there's a section on the Apocrypha. You can see all the lectures that I'm listening to, podcasts I'm listening to, videos I'm watching on them, and scholars I refer to, books I'm reading on it. You can find it all. Even better, you can also find an introduction and summary that explains 1 Maccabees in a succinct and significant way on my website. On the Works and Writings page of it, if you go to Apocrypha, you can click that. Or if you're just on my website and you scroll to the very bottom, I just changed this. So now if you scroll to the very bottom and you see Apocrypha, you can click that. And on the Apocrypha page, you'll actually see introductions to all the major Apocrypha. Now, there are some minor ones that I haven't done, and you can find introductions to all of them. And with the release of this podcast episode, I'm also releasing an introduction and summary of 1 Maccabees, and so you can find that there. And you can also find all my notes on all of my other primary source documents that I'm studying, as well as Josephus, which I'm reading through on my website there. So I just wanted to preface this episode with saying that, as I do with all of the episodes in this series. But without further ado, I wanted to jump into 1 Maccabees. Now, as I said already, the Maccabees is the central, most significant historical event that happens between the time of Malachi and Jesus, so as to say. It's the event after which we date a lot of the texts from the Apocrypha, is finding out whether they happened before or after this event. And it was a very, very divisive issue. In fact, sometime during some Maccabean leader, we're not sure who, one sect of Jews entirely broke off from the Maccabees and went on to near the Qumran Wadi to establish a community. And some people think they're the Essenes, and they wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they had a big problem with one of the Maccabeans, which is not really a very good technical term, and I'll get to that in a second. The Pharisees and the Sadducees later come out of this, and Judah is made its own independent state. And 1 Maccabees tells that whole story, and so much more. And so 1 Maccabees is actually in favor of the Maccabean or the Hasmonean family. Now, the term Maccabee or Maccabean, it's used a lot of times to refer to the entirety of the family. But really, if you're reading this text, you won't get that idea. The term Maccabee is today used, and this came from Christians. Today, the term Maccabee is used to refer to the whole family. However, for example, if you're just reading this text, you'll see that there's only one person referred to as the Maccabee, and that is one of the sons named Judah or Judas. It's the same name. Judas is the Greek version, and Judah is the Hebrew version. So in the NRSV, it names him Judas, and it calls him the Maccabee. You may also see him called Maccabeus. Again, it's the same thing. Maccabeus is Greek. Maccabee is Hebrew. They both mean hammer, and he's called the Hammerer because of his military power and strength, as you'll see in this account. So anyways, all of these, Judah has a bunch of different brothers, and they all have their own nicknames. And Judah's nickname is the Hammerer, the Maccabee. And so that's where the term comes from. But a lot of people, because he is the kind of the central figure of that family, and the one that gives them their rise to taking back Judea in the first place. Because of that, a lot of his family is just referred to as the Maccabean family. But really, as we learn from other sources, such as Josephus, we know that a better, more precise, technical term for the family would be Hasmoneans. They have a descendant named Hasmoneus, and so the better term to refer to them, which is going to be the term that I at least try to use throughout the rest of this podcast, is Hasmonean. So they established their own dynasty, starting with Judah the Maccabee, Judah the Hammerer. And then that dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty, will go on for some time then. And it will have its own presented problems and everything. So I kind of gave you quite a bit of helpful side information that'll help you kind of better understand this as we go through. And of course, I'm going to just jump in, and we're going to look at this text and see what I'm going to go over it, the story that it tells, the significance, kind of its perspective and its difference from the other Maccabean texts. Now, this text, if you're thinking about reading it, has 16 chapters, and a lot of these chapters, to be honest, they can have anywhere from like 30 to about like 60, or I think some of them may have 80 verses in them. A lot of these chapters are really long. They're like the size of 2 or 3 chapters. So, and it reads a lot like, at least in the style, it's kind of like Kings. And so if you're interested in military conquests, if you're interested in history and all that good stuff, this is the apocrypha for you, for sure. But yeah, it's not super long. The chapters are pretty long, but the text itself is just 16 chapters. And in my Oxford annotated apocrypha, it is 40 pages. That's with the annotations taking up about like sometimes a third of a page. So anyways, with that, I'll jump into the text and we'll look at it. And so the text it opens up with Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, and that is, as we all know, Alexander the Great. And it begins with him. It talks about how he is successful in taking over the whole known world. And this is just a really quick look at the past history, because this is going to set the stage for what happens next. And it says that he takes over the whole world. He falls sick, and he sees that he's going to die. And so what this says is, it says that he brings together all of his officers, and he divides his kingdom among them while he's still alive. And then he reigns 12 years, and he dies. And then it says that his officers begin to rule in his place. Now, the only real officers of his that are important for the story of 1 Maccabees are what's called the Ptolemies, which are going to have their reign and dominion in the south, and the Seleucids. And the Seleucids are going to be up towards the north. And they're the kind of Syrians. So you have the Greco-Syrians and the Greco kind of Egyptians is a way of thinking of them. And the Ptolemies have their own reign. And originally they owned Egypt and some of northeast Africa and Judea. And the Seleucids, in the beginning at least, own kind of Syria and that area. So that all is explained in just a couple of paragraphs. But anyways, it goes on to kind of describe the downfall of Judea, at least in the beginning. And it talks about these renegades. Now, when it says renegades, it's talking about apostates. It says that these renegades or apostates from Israel, they come and they tell other Israelites, they get other Israelites to join in on them. It says to make a covenant with the Gentiles around them, since they're separated from many disasters that have come upon them. This is in chapter 1, verse 11. And so they get a bunch of other Jews to join them to not be any different from the Gentiles. And so they even tell the king, they ask the king to have a Gentile gymnasium built in Jerusalem. Now, if you don't see the problem with that, first of all, a couple of things. A gymnasium in ancient Greece was a place where people came together to have philosophical discussions, and of course to work out, to swim, to do all of that great stuff. But they all did it naked. Now, if you think about this for 1 second, Jews, one of the defining facts of a Jew is that they're circumcised. And so them trying to get the Gentiles to build a gymnasium, and it is built, makes it so that a lot of Jews then are persuaded to go to that gymnasium and to work out and to join in on the public life, because this is a really big and important and great building that's made in Jerusalem. So they want to join in on that. But then it's shown that they're Jews, because you're running around and working out naked with a bunch of other men. And you can see which ones are Jews and which ones are not. And so they desire to not be seen as different or like the Gentiles. And so what it says is that they removed the marks of circumcision and they abandoned the Holy Covenant. So in other words, they uncircumcised themselves. Now, you may be asking, well, did they just take the skin that they cut off and then put it back on? Because if you know anything about circumcision, you cut it off and it's gone. It's withered up and it's gone. And, you know, I haven't really looked into this a lot. I don't really care to, or I actually don't want to if somebody presented it to me. But the point is, and I think there is some scholarly debate as to how they did this, but in one way or another, I've heard that there's one way that they could get surgery by stretching their skin, that they could add things on. Anyways, they find some clever way to get their circumcision painfully undone. However it's done, that happens. And so they are now fully not recognizable as Jews, because they're not circumcised anymore, and they've given up one of the major parts of the covenant. And if you read in Genesis chapter 17, where God first told Abraham that he is to circumcise himself and all his children after him, then you see that anyone who's not circumcised should be cut off. They should be cut off from Israel. So this is a pretty serious thing. And in the eyes of 1 Maccabees, you're going to see this all throughout. There's a bunch of betrayal, and a lot of it is done by Jews who are renegades or apostates. And they're not just renegades or apostates for themselves. They're lying and cheating and trying to trick others and persuading other Jews to join them as well. A lot of times, they're even bringing about the downfall of other Jews who are faithful to the Torah later on. And third of all, in the view of the author of 1 Maccabees, as well as other Second Temple Jews, Deuteronomy was taken very seriously. And so the covenants there had blessings for those who were faithful to the Torah and cursings for those who weren't. And so whenever Jews were unfaithful and they didn't obey the Torah, the commandments that God had given them, that brought destruction. That brought exile in the first place. And the one hope that they have is that they are brought out of exile and that the Messiah will save them and bring them back into the land and in their eyes, they believe, restore the nation. And here, they only have people more and more becoming Hellenized. Now, the word Hellenized doesn't mean to become more hellish, like an unbeliever, but the Hellenists, Hellenism just refers to Greek culture. So it means joining in on the Greek way of life. And so as they become more Hellenized, they're leaving Judaism, they're leaving the covenant, they're being disloyal to it. And besides them just straight up delivering over faithful Jews to be killed, at the same time, because of the covenant, they're dragging all of Jerusalem, all of Judea, all of the faithful Jews down. And the horrible events that happen and what the Gentiles end up doing to Jerusalem and Judea and the wars that are fought against it are caused by the unfaithfulness of these Jews. These few, well, they're actually growing and bringing more Jews to themselves, but these few unfaithful Jews are causing the curses and the war and the complications and all the evil upon Judea for the whole of the Jews, the few unfaithful Jews. And so this is a really big theme for all of 1 Maccabees. And so for this is the one thing that's kind of setting off a lot of different things, and it's starting with the gymnasium. And so, anyways, it says that Antiochus, now, there are going to be a lot of Antiochuses, and this is the first Antiochus Epiphanes. There will be another Antiochus Epiphanes as well, but this is Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, which Epiphanes means manifestation of God, so you can already assume how he feels towards the Jews who worship one living God who can't be represented by anything. So he sees that his kingdom's established, and he goes to Egypt to go to take land from the Ptolemies and win some more for himself. And the King Ptolemy flees, and he loses, and so King Antiochus is winning there. And so on his way back from Egypt, he decides, why don't I just stop by Jerusalem? And he raids the temple there, and he gets all the gold from it, and he takes the golden altar, the lampstand, the light, and all its utensils. And one other thing, I'm just going to shout myself out again here, maybe for the last time. You can see all my Bible references on my website as well under the apocrypha notes. And you don't go to the 1 Maccabees section for that. You'll just scroll all the way to the bottom and click Bible references. And you'll see that Daniel 11 is very much tracking with what's happening here. And, at least towards the beginning, it is very similar to what's happening here with the king of the north, the king of the south. So anyways, let me just read what it says in Daniel chapter 11. In Daniel chapter 11, 28, and this is a prophecy about, and you'll remember that this is the four, I'm starting to forget. Okay, that's right. It's an angel that's describing the future and what's to take place from there. And in verse 28, he says that there shall be a king from the north who goes to the south. He says that he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his land. So, and 1 Maccabees is presenting this as King Antiochus, the king from the north. Remember Syria, the northern king given the land from Alexander the Great. He goes to the south to Egypt, and on the way up, he sets his hand against the holy temple, which is God's place among men, and he takes all the gold from it. He strips it. He takes also, he takes the gold from it, the altar, the lampstand, its utensils, the table for the presence, for the bread of the presence, the cups for drink offerings, the bowls, gold censers, curtains, crowns, the gold decoration. He strips it. He takes the silver and gold, the costly vessels, and the hidden treasures, and he takes it all with himself. And he goes. And this is already 24 verses in. So this is just action-packed, fast-moving, And also throughout here are dispersed a lot of, I believe there's 7 poems throughout. Whenever something dramatic happens, there's a poem. And so, for example, it says that he shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. Israel mourned deeply in every community. Rulers and elders groaned. Young women and young men became faint. The beauty of the women faded. Every bridegroom took up the lament. She who sat in the bridal chamber was mourning. Evening and land trembled. Even the land trembled for its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. And then 2 years later, this king goes to Jerusalem again, and he's speaking peacefully, and everyone believes him. And then he comes in, he destroys a lot of people, plunders the city, burns it with fire, tears down its houses and its walls, takes the women and children captives, takes the livestock, and then they build up a strong fortress there. And they station people there who are apostates. So, and again, it breaks out in another poem. I'm not going to read all of those. But anyways, you can see that this is just horrific, how this just leads to a whole downslide. And it started with these apostate Jews. Then Antiochus had this isolated event of taking over Egypt and coming back. And, he just needed the money because his nation had grown. And, I'm obviously not saying what he did was right, but of course he takes from Judea, he takes the gold from there. And then he comes back and burns it down, takes people for himself. And it's absolutely horrific. And then the king writes to the kingdom. He says that all the Jews need to start living like the Gentiles. And he says them that they are not to have burnt offerings or sacrifices or drink offerings in the temple, and that they are not to work on Sabbaths. It says to profane the Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine, pigs, and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised, and that they are to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane. And that's chapter 1, 41 through 48. So that they would forget the law and change all their ordinances. And he says that whoever does not obey the command of the king will die. So he writes that to the whole, to all the people. And many of the people, they just give in and they give up on the law. And, this is thorough. You can't read the Torah. You can't rest on the Sabbath or on festivals. He tells them to defile just all the temple, to not offer up any sacrifices, except they're supposed to make their own shrines for idols and sacrifice to those unclean animals. So anyways, a lot of people absolutely just give up. And so all the people who are faithful, they are driven into hiding. And it says on the 15th day of Chislev, in the 145th year, which is 167 BC, it says that they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. Now, let me read real quick. Daniel chapter 11, 30 through 33. It says that ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall lose his heart and withdraw. He shall be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and come to an understanding with those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces sent by him shall occupy and profane the temple and the fortress. They shall abolish the regular burnt offering and set up the desolating sacrilege. Notice that exact same word. And then he will flatter with smooth words those who violate the covenant, but the people who are loyal to their God shall stand firm and take action. The wise among the people shall give understanding to many. For some days, however, they shall fall by sword and flame and suffer captivity and plunder. Now recognize he's already burnt down Jerusalem, taken people for captive, and killed people by the sword. So that's already happened. He set up a desolating sacrilege, and what a lot of people interpret this to be is that Antiochus offered up a sacrifice of a pig to Zeus at the temple, which is just terrible because the temple, pigs are unclean animals. They are like the number one unclean animal. The temple is the presence of Yahweh God, the God of Israel, the only God who's not supposed to be presented at all. But there's an idol of Zeus, and he's offering up his own unclean sacrifice to that. So you can see how that's filled, how he is against the Holy Covenant, just all of this. So anyways, it says that they built altars in the surrounding towns of Judah and offer incense at the doors of houses in the streets. You're only supposed to offer offerings at Jerusalem. The books of the law, that's the Torah that they found, they just tore it to pieces and burned it with fire. Anyone possessing the book of the covenant or anyone who adhered to the law was condemned to death by the decree of the king. And they kept using violence against Israel, against those who were found month after month in the towns. And they offered a sacrifice on the altar that was on top of the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families and those who circumcised them, and they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. I mean, this is just absolutely horrific. And it goes on and it says that many, however, in Israel stood firm, and they're resolved in their heart not to eat unclean food. They choose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant, and they would die. And very great wrath came upon Israel. So all this is, and recognize that the officers that Antiochus Epiphanes appoints are those renegades, those apostate Jews, are the Jews who are to oversee that those that do obey the law and that are faithful to the Torah should be killed. Those are the ones that end up actually doing it. And so many faithful people are dying, many faithful Jews. So anyways, and I know I've been going into a lot of detail in these first chapters, and there's a lot of details in the coming ones, and you can kind of like forget a lot of it, like not too soon after reading it. Like Kings, it's like, okay, how many kings were there? What all happened? But you get a kind of gist of it. There were some faithful in the south, none faithful in the north, and some stick out more than other, Hezekiah, Manasseh, and such, and Josiah, and whatever. But so anyways, this is all really important because it's setting the stage for the rest of what's to come. And so for the rest of this, I'm just going to be more brief. And, as we get further out, stuff is a little bit less and less important. Still important nonetheless. But that's why that takes so much. It's a devastating blow. And anyways, it's then that we are introduced to a man named Mattathias, and Mattathias has 5 sons. He has John, surnamed Gaddai, Simon called Tassi, Judas called Maccabeus, and I don't know if I mentioned this already. He's called Judas in this. Judah, it's the same thing. Maccabeus and Maccabee, it's the same thing. Eleazar called Avaron, and Jonathan called Aphus. And he sees what's going on, and he is just absolutely distraught by it. He thinks it's just absolutely terrible. Also, let me just explain what the nicknames are real quick. So, for example, Maccabeus means hammer, and I was thinking that the notes here said it. Yeah, I forgot. Okay, yeah, no. The notes say that the other names are uncertain. I've heard scholars give what they think the other names mean, but anyways. Oh well. So he sees what's happening, and he thinks it's just terrible. He tears his clothes, he mourns and laments, and he has his whole poem where he laments it. And then the king's officers are at that time, they're enforcing the apostasy, and many from Israel are coming, and Mattathias and his sons are assembled, and they tell him that he's honored, and they tell him, since you're honored, you should go and listen to the king and do what he commands. And Mattathias says, even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey and have chosen to obey his commands, every one of them abandoning the religion of their ancestors, I and my sons and my brothers will continue to live by the covenant of our ancestors. And he goes into this really long kind of rant and talks about how he absolutely will not obey this command to disobey the law. And he calls on everybody who wants to be faithful to the law to come with him and go into the desert. And he sees this person who is offering up a sacrifice, an apostate who's offering up a sacrifice to a foreign god, and he kills this guy on the altar. And then he kills the apostate Jew who was overseeing him and made sure he did it as well. And this actually gives a lot of insight into what's happening here. So in 2:26 it says, after he kills this Jew and the renegade apostate Jew who made this Jew sacrifice, and an unclean sacrifice to an idol, he says, thus he burned with zeal for the law, just as Phinehas did against Zimri, son of Salu. And now, if you don't know the story of Phinehas, it's from Numbers chapter 25. And Phinehas is a priest, and pretty much there's this plague of wrath coming from God against the people because they're cohabiting with Canaanite people. And there is this one couple, this Jew who's with this Canaanite woman right in front of the tent. And Phinehas goes and he impales them both and kills them both with a spear right in front. And it kind of stops the wrath right there. And so you can see right there where that theology meets, of where these Jews who are unfaithful and apostatizing and bringing this wrath. It says that there is great wrath that came upon Israel in chapter 1, verse 64. And then here we see how, Mattathias, not in the technical sense of the word, but just as a description, is shown as being zealous and killing that unfaithful Jew and the renegade apostate officer over him. He's shown as kind of like a Phinehas, and God blesses Phinehas and he appoints him. It says that he appoints him as an eternal priest. It says that his priesthood will go on for forever. And as we're going to see, Mattathias' sons are going to be shown as, it's going to talk about how their priesthood is going to go on for forever later. And so it's portraying this as necessary. These unfaithful Jews that are bringing wrath upon Israel, how do Jews deal with this? Well, one Maccabees is in favor of the Maccabees in the Hasmonean Dynasty. And for them, they believe that the Maccabees are they're good leaders and they're strong and powerful, and that God has appointed them to lead Israel, and that it needs to happen through the destruction of these apostates. People are going to continue apostatizing and bringing wrath upon Israel. And what needs to happen? They need to die. They need to be destroyed. Otherwise, it's going to bring destruction and death on the Jews who actually are being faithful. So then he cries, and he calls for everybody who wants to be faithful to the Torah to come out with him and his family and be faithful in the desert. So they go out, and him and a group of people, they go out and they live in the desert. And then it's told to the king's officers, what had happened of Mattathias, who rejected the king's command. So they go out to war, and they all come, and they're going to destroy these Jews for leaving, for being faithful to the covenant, for disobeying the king's command and killing this person. But it's the Sabbath. And so there's this one group of Jews that's like, well, it's the Sabbath. We need to rest. And so if they come upon us and they kill us, there's nothing we can do. and so they're destroyed by them. But Mattathias says, if we do this, we're going to be absolutely destroyed if we refuse to fight with the Gentiles on the Sabbath. This is for our life. And so they fight on the Sabbath, and they fight them off, and then they go back. They're united with another sect of Jews, group of Jews called the Hasmoneans, and they're called Mighty Warriors of Israel. And so they go and they organize an army, and they strike down some sinners. It doesn't really say where, but anyways, they strike down some sinners and some unfaithful renegade Jews in their wrath, and they tear down the altars. These are the altars to the idols, because there's supposed to be one altar in Jerusalem. They forcibly circumcised all the uncircumcised boys that they found within the borders of Israel. They hunt down the arrogant and the work that prospered in their hands, and they rescued the law out of the hands of the Gentiles and kings. And that's from verses 42 through 48 of chapter 2. So then Mattathias is about to die, and so he turns to his children, and he tells them that wrath has come upon Israel because of these unfaithful Jews, pretty much. And he says to be faithful like Abraham and Joseph and Phineas. He says, Phineas, our ancestor, he was deeply zealous, and he received the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Be faithful like Joshua. And he became a judge in Israel, and be like Caleb and David and Elijah, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel. And he is especially speaking to two of his sons, who we're going to see are going to go on to be his most important sons. He says this especially to his two sons. He says to Simeon, I know you're wise in counsel, always listen to him, and he shall be your father. He says that of his brothers. That's in verse 65. And in 66 it says, Judas Maccabeus, Judah the Maccabee, has been a mighty warrior from his youth, and he shall command the army for you and fight the battle against your people. Against the peoples, or the Gentiles. And you shall rally around him, and you shall observe the law. So he calls them to covenant faithfulness. This is a sort of testament, so as to say. And so Mattathias then dies. And then we're brought into the next major section. That whole section was just the introduction. And then in this next section, which is from chapters 3 to chapter 9, verse 22, when Judah Maccabee dies, this section is all revolving around Judah Maccabee taking charge and commanding. So then Judah the Maccabee goes out, and this is the kind of the poem it has. It says that he extended the glory of his people like a giant. He put on his breastplate, he bound on his armor of war and waged battles, protecting the camp by his sword. He was like a lion in his deeds, like a lion's cub roaring for prey. He searched out and pursued those who broke the law. He burned those who troubled his people. Lawbreakers shrank back for fear of him. All the evildoers were confounded, and deliverance prospered by his hand. He embittered many kings, but he made Jacob glad by his deeds, and his memory is blessed forever. He went through the cities of Judah. He destroyed the ungodly out of the land. Thus he turned away wrath from Israel. He was renowned to the ends of the earth. He gathered people who were perishing. Then this person named Apollonius, he brings up Gentiles and Samaritans against him, and Judah comes in and he defeats him and he destroys him. And then this other Syrian general says that he is going to come and he's going to make a name for himself by destroying Judah. And so Judah, he starts out with just a small group of untrained militia, and he encourages them, and he says, it's easy for many to be hemmed in by few, for in the sight of heaven there is no difference between saving by many or by few. And he gives this encouraging talk to stay faithful to the law and to fight for what they know is right. And so they rush in and they destroy them. They destroy these well-prepared, trained troops, and they win. And King Antiochus hears of this, and he is angry. So he gasts all his money, a year worth, to pay for all of the army that he needs. And so he sees that maybe he doesn't have enough money to pay for what he needs to. So, anyways, he's confused, and he's determined to go to Persia to collect money and get the money for that. And anyways, the rest of this, it goes throughout, and there are a bunch of just stories of Judah Maccabee going on and freeing Jews who are being oppressed by Gentiles in many different regions. And he goes around, and eventually they come to Jerusalem. And it has another little poem. As always, it says, "Jerusalem is uninhabited like a wilderness. No one of her children went in or out. The sanctuary was trampled down, and aliens held the citadel. It was a lodging place for the Gentiles, and joy was taken from Jacob. The flute and the harp ceased to play." And, they don't know what to do, because the Jerusalem and the temple has been defiled. It's been profaned and made unclean by the idols and the straight up pigs that were offered on the altar. So they tear their clothes, they mourn, they fast, they put on sackcloth and ashes. They open the book of the law to see what should happen. Because it says that they opened the book of the law to inquire into those matters about which the Gentiles consulted the likenesses of their gods. So they looked at the law, even though the Gentiles asked their gods, they look at the law, and they bring the vestments of the priesthood and the first fruits and the tithes, and they go and they ask, what are we supposed to do with this now that it's been made defiled? And so, anyways, they sound their trumpets. Judas appoints leaders of the people to become new priests, and then they rebuild the temple. They destroy everything in the temple that was impure. So, for example, the altar. They destroy the altar, and they put the stones that were there for the altar in a different place that they could mark until later when a prophet should tell them where to put it. Oh, sorry. Actually, that part is actually a little bit before. This is not until later in chapter 4 so that's talking about Jerusalem, but later in chapter 4, when it actually gets to the part where it talks about the temple, it says that all the army assembled, they went up to Mount Zion. They saw that the sanctuary desolate, the altar profaned, and the gates burned. In the courts they saw bushes sprung up as in a thicket, or as on one of the mountains. And they saw also the chambers of the priests in ruins. And so they tear their clothes, they mourn with great lamentation, they sprinkle themselves with ashes, fall on their face to the ground. And a signal... and when the signal was given with the trumpets, they cried out to heaven. And this is the end of chapter 4. And then he tells men to fight against those in the citadel to win it. Then they clean the sanctuary. He puts new priests in place. They cleanse the sanctuary. They remove the stones to an unclean place because, again, they had been defiled. And then they ask what they should do about the altar that had been defiled, to do about the altar of burnt offering. And they think that it's best to just tear it down so that it's not a lasting shame to them that the Gentiles had defiled it. And so they tear it down, and they store the stones in a convenient place on the temple hill until a prophet should come to tell them what to do with them. And now that's another major thing. And, I actually can't remember where else it says this, but I believe there's another place in this where it talks about them not knowing what to do until a prophet should tell them what to do. Let's see. But no, I can't find it. But that is a major thing in 1 Maccabees, is that there's a wait for a prophet to come. And even in 1 Maccabees 9:27, it says that there is great distress in Israel, such as has not been since the prophets ceased to appear among them. And now that's a totally different part of 1 Maccabees, but that is, a couple things. They thought that prophecy, the author of 1 Maccabees believes that prophecy had finished with the prophets of the Hebrew scriptures. Now, there is a divide. I believe that there is a divide among those and other people who were called apocalyptists, like those in Qumran. They believed that prophecy was well and about, and they even believed that there was a Messiah who was sharing prophetic things. And they may have even had an extended canon, possibly. And a lot of other Jews who are apocalyptic very well probably believed that prophecy continued as well, although they didn't necessarily believe that the canon continued. Again, that's another thing that I talk about in another podcast episode, episode 2 of Searching the Scriptures. But anyways, one of the major themes in 1 Maccabees is, though the Hasmoneans are making Judea independent again and they're reestablishing a new priesthood, they're still awaiting another prophet. And so they until a prophet can tell them what to do with these stones, they put them aside. And so they use unhewn stones as the law directs, stones that hadn't been cut, and they built a new altar like the former one. They rebuild the sanctuary and restore it. They make new vessels, a new lampstand, a new altar of incense, and a table for the presence. And they place bread on it, and they finish it. And this happens on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Chislev, in the year 148, which is actually 164 BC, so 3 years after it had been defiled, on the exact same day that it had been defiled. And if you're interested, this is the celebration of Hanukkah. It says, in fact, in verse 56 of chapter 4, that they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and joyfully offered burnt offerings. They offered a sacrifice of well-being and a thanksgiving offering. And they all rejoice. And, you know, I do think this is funny. One of the scholars that I enjoy, his name is Lawrence Schiffman, and he's a Jewish scholar. And he notes that, you know, this book is in the Roman Catholic, the Orthodox canon. And in their canon, they have a book about Hanukkah, which is a Jewish holiday that Christians don't celebrate. Whereas, you know, it's kind of like if a Jew had the Christmas story in their canon. But here, you know, Catholics and Orthodox people have the Hanukkah story. Anyways, that's just kind of funny. So anyways, that's really the height of Judah Maccabee's career. But he does go on for a long time to build up a strong army and continue to win wars. In fact, whenever any other group of Jews try to win wars without them, they fail. So, even though they're trying to bring glory back to Israel, they're being obedient to the law, we'll assume. They want to do what's right and bring independence, but they fail. They can't do it without the Maccabees. And so the author of 1 Maccabees is very clearly in support of specifically the Maccabean family and them being in charge and them being the people that are leading these battles out against the Gentiles. And remember, they had built up their army and fought against great armies of massive amounts with untrained militia and got themselves to a big army. So anyways, in chapter 5, starting in verse 55, it says, when Judas and Jonathan were in Gilead and their brother Simon was in Galilee before Ptolemais, Joseph, son of Zechariah, and Azariah, the commanders of the forces, heard of their brave deeds and of the heroic war that they had fought. They're inspired by the Maccabees. So they said, let us also make a name for ourselves. Let us go and make war on the Gentiles around us. So they issue orders to the men of the forces that were with them and marched against Jamnia. Gorgias and his men came out of the town to meet him in battle. Then Joseph and Azariah were routed and were pursued to the borders of Judea. As many as 2,000 of the people of Israel fell that day. Thus the people suffered a great rout because, thinking to do a brave deed, they did not listen to Judas and his brothers, but they did not belong to the family of those men through whom deliverance was given to Israel. The man Judah and his brothers were greatly honored in all Israel among all the Gentiles, wherever their name was heard. And people gathered to them and praised them. So, here you see that this author is very much in support of Judah Maccabee. It says that these are the people that God has chosen to bring deliverance to Israel through. And this is also another very important part of 1 Maccabees. And you can see how it sets the model for the Messianic expectation. You know, you probably hear all the time about how the Jews in the day of Jesus expected their Messiah to come in, destroy all the Gentiles, especially those that are occupying and oppressing Israel, to bring him to the land. And you see that in this book. Not all the Gentiles, actually. As we'll see later on, there are some specific groups of Gentiles that are seen with actually a lot of favor from the Jews. But they will also, something that's not really talked about a lot, and this is a very popular view. We also see this in what's called the Songs of Solomon, which talks about the Messiah going in and destroying unfaithful Jews. Because remember, the unfaithful Jews are the ones that are bringing the covenant curse upon all Israel, dragging it into exile, and bringing it so that the Gentiles that are evil do what they do to Israel. And so, anyways, you can kind of see how this author is very much in favor of the Hasmonean Dynasty, and they believe if there's one way that Israel is going to be brought back to its independence, it's through this family. This family is what sets the kind of the mold for the Messianic model. So, anyways, continuing on, you also see, like in verse 65, it says, Judas and his brothers went out and fought against the descendants of Esau in the land to the south. And it's using an anachronism. Well, it's not using an anachronism technically, but Esau is the brother of Jacob. Jacob is also named Israel. So Esau represents, he was the non-chosen brother of Isaac. So he's one of the many characters in very early on in the Bible, in Genesis, who are used to represent all the kind of your typical Gentile. So the descendants of Esau, it's not really talking about the Edomites, it's just talking in general about Gentiles. And I tried to look through and find them again, and I couldn't, so maybe I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, because I read this actually some weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, but I thought that there were anachronisms all throughout 1 Maccabees. Maybe I'm mixing that with another one, or not. I'm pretty sure it's this one. I think at least one time it talks about Philistines. It also talks about Canaanite people. It used Canaanite people names someplace, I believe, when it talks about them going through. And it certainly uses the language of, I believe it's Deuteronomy or Joshua, when it talks about how they are supposed to go through and destroy the Canaanite peoples, and it uses that language as it talks about them going back, repossessing the land, and destroying the Gentiles who are occupying it, as well as the other people, the unfaithful Jews that were dragging it down into exile in the first place. So, anyways, he's staunchly in favor of that, the Maccabean family, and so that's in Genesis in chapter 5. I believe that happened in chapter 5. Anyways, this is it's pretty insane. In fact, it says later that an official of the king comes to tell the King Antiochus, that Judah has. They're telling him about, it's been some time of Judah winning wars and continuing on in his military successes. And I just love this story in chapter 6, verse 8. When the king heard this news, he was astounded and badly shaken. He took to his bed and became sick from disappointment, because things had not turned out for him as he had planned. He lay there for many days and because deep disappointment continually gripped him, and he realized that he was dying. So he called his friends. He says, tells them about what woe has happened to him because of what he has done. And he dies. He literally dies of disappointment, at least according to this ruler. Anyways, going on later in I believe it's chapter 8, there's this new king who's established, King Demetrius, and this one person by the name of Alchemist. He's a Jew, and he attempts to become high priest. He wants to become high priest. So he sucks up to this guy, and he says that he will, he tells him about Judah Maccabee and all the war he's causing and all the ruin and all the trouble that he's bringing. And so he tells that to King Demetrius, hoping that he'll win he'll win and become the new high priest. And I believe in 2 Maccabees it talks about how he pays him off, and he is given the position of high priest, which is you can only get that through family line. So he's buying it illegally, which is ironic, but he's obviously one of these renegades that's trying to destroy Judah, Judah is trying to liberate Judea. But anyways, he sends him with Bacchides. I actually don't know how to pronounce his name. They go in and, they ask for peace with the Hasidians. And the Hasidians believe him. They're like, oh, of course, a priest from the line of Aaron. We'll let him in. And then they come in and they destroy them. And so then Judah Maccabee comes in, takes that back, and Alchemist is afraid, so he flees in fear. And then he comes back and... before he comes back, they send in Nicanor. Now, it says that Nicanor hated and detested Israel, and he's sent to go and destroy them. So he goes to Jerusalem with a large force to destroy Judah Maccabee and his brothers. But of course he says, "Let there be no fighting between you and me, and I shall come with a few men to see you face to face." And so he comes and he greets him peaceably. But he planned to take him, to kidnap him. But Judas, he finds out, and so he does not meet with him again. And so whenever Nicanor finds out about this, he goes out to meet Judas in battle in Kafar Salamah. And I probably pronounced that terribly wrong. But anyways, 500 of the army of Nicanor fell, and the rest fled into the city of David. And so then Nicanor is ticked. He just lost to this guy that he was supposed to defeat. And so he goes up to Mount Zion, and it says, and this is verse 33 of chapter 7, some of the priests from the sanctuary and some of the elders of the people came out to greet him peaceably and to show him the burnt offering that was being offered for the king. But he mocked them and derided them and defiled them and spoke arrogantly. And in anger he swore his oath, "Unless Judas and his army were delivered into my hands this time, then if I return safely, I will burn up this house." He's referring to the temple. So he threatens to destroy the temple if he comes back safely from defeating Judah. It's, terrible thing that he just swears, of course. And so he goes out extremely angry. And so the priests go before the altar and they weep. And there's a poem, they're weeping. And so Nicanor, he goes out from Jerusalem and to Beth-horon, and Judas and Adasa with 3,000 men. And Judah, he prays for God to send an angel like he did to destroy the 185,000 of the Assyrians, and to destroy Nicanor like he did with them, with his army, for that angel to fight with him. So anyways, they go and they fight against Nicanor, and they absolutely destroy him. And they just absolutely destroy him. They plunder him. They cut off his hand and they cut off his head and his right hand that he had so arrogantly stretched out, and brought them and displayed them just outside Jerusalem. And then everybody is they're all enjoying themselves. And this is, if you couldn't tell, recall the story of Judith. Judith is actually a allegory for this. Judith, now if you haven't read, that's fine. You can just listen to my podcast, which is the 3rd episode of this apocrypha series. But anyways, Judith is the female name for Judah, and Holofernes is Nicanor. And so Judith pretends to be just going to join their camp, and then she actually secretly kills Holofernes, cuts off his head, brings it, puts it to the top of the temple. They scare all that army, and they go out and they destroy them thus. And so they cut off Nicanor's head and his hand, because he put it out against the temple, in the same way that Holofernes tries to take Jerusalem and destroy the temple in Judith. So anyways, that's right there. That's pretty cool. So anyways, then in chapter 8 later, it goes on and it just tells about the Romans and how great they are and all that they've done, and how Judas has heard that. And so Judah Maccabee goes and he sets up an alliance with them, and they make an alliance with them. And that's pretty much the gist of chapter 8. And then in chapter 9, when Demetrius hears that Nicanor had fallen, he then sends Bacchides and Alchemists. I said alchemists earlier, actually. And both of these names I really don't know how to pronounce. Alcimus, it's Alcimus. Anyways, he sends them to go back, and so they go and they go in with a formidable army and to fight against Judah. And Judah Maccabee, his army is actually terrified this time, and a lot of them had slipping away, and the battle was coming. And he tells his army, "Let us go up and go against our enemies, so that we may have strength to fight them." And they're losing heart, and they say, "We do not have the strength. Let us rather save our own lives now, and let us come back with our kindred and fight them. We are too few." And Judah says, "Far be it from us to do such a thing as to flee from them. If our time has come, let us die bravely for our kindred and leave no cause to question our honor." Anyways, Judah Maccabee goes into war, and he fights against them, and he dies. And all Judah is just terribly distraught over this, and they mourn. And there's a poem that says, how the mighty have fallen, the Savior of Israel. And it goes on to say that the rest of the acts of his deeds, his wars, his brave deeds, have they not been recorded? But they were very many. And remember that that's very much like the formula for the ends of kings. So anyways, that is the major first half of the book. It's a lot. It's very important stuff that, I wanted to go over. So anyways, that goes until verse 22. And then the next section, which is chapter 9, verse 23 to the end of chapter 12, talks about Jonathan, his brother, because his brother then takes rulership. And Eleazar had also died beforehand in a battle, but that was a more minor battle, so I went over it. And that's another thing about this book. If you do decide to read it, which I would very much recommend, of course, it is just filled with all these new characters, a lot of Antiochuses, new Antiochus, new Demetrius, new Ptolemaeus, and just left and right, new characters introduced. It's like one of those really long movies, those just super long movies, and you just, if you ever just walk out of the room and come back for one moment, you go to use the restroom, you come back, you blow your nose, whatever it is, and you come back and you're just lost. That kind of is what it's like with 1 Maccabees. So I'm, even with my explanations, and I'm trying to explain things well, I'm also, to be honest, after I read it, which has been some weeks past, I forgot quite a bit of it, and this is my 5th time, at least my 5th time reading through it. I can only remember the major stuff. But anyways, it's still interesting. He dies. There's a bunch of like really big elephants that they just feed up on these grapes to get them drunk and go crazy in battle. These war elephants that they put warriors and archers on. Anyways, the brother Eleazar goes under and tries to cut open its belly, one of the big elephants, because he supposes the king is on it, and the elephant falls on him and crushes him, and he dies in battle. So anyways, I will pick up the pace here now, though, because Jonathan is less important, and the author, while he sees him as a Maccabee and still important nonetheless, he's significantly less so. And even Simon, who will go on to reign after him, he sees as more important. So it shows Jonathan, he does continue to win battles. And then after that, this King Demetrius, as well as King Demetrius, as well as another king, King Alexander. I have to be honest, I forgot what he reigns. But they pretty much try to fight to become allies with Jonathan, and give bigger offer up to the other person. And this gives Jonathan the opportunity to rebuild Jerusalem's walls because of the protection he's given, as well as one of them says that they will make him high priest, which, again, you can't really be given that. It comes through family. But nonetheless, Rome hears that Judah Maccabee dies, and so they also reestablished their alliance with Jonathan as they had with Judah. However, in the end, Jonathan is tricked by an invitation to meet with a supposed friend. He's trapped, and they kill him. And that is the end of his reign. And then chapters 13 through the end, through 16, have to do with Simon. Simon goes on to become the ruler after him, and he is also a good ruler and warrior, and he's shown at least at the same level, well, maybe not the same level, if not at the same level, near to the same level as Judah Maccabee. And, it encourages Judea. He finishes building the walls and reestablishes, he rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem. He reestablishes Judea's independence. And in fact, it says that other Gentile nations start to recognize the day in which he became the king. In 13, verse 41, it says, in the 170th year, that's 142 BC, the yoke of the Gentiles was removed from Israel. In other words, it became officially independent, and the Gentiles started to recognize it. The people began to write, it says in verse 42, that the people began to write in their documents and contracts in the first year of Simon, the great high priest and commander and leader of the Jews. He also in a way to honor his father and his brothers. He makes really great polished stone monuments for them. He builds pyramids for them, 7 pyramids for his father, his mother, and his 4 brothers. And he makes an elaborate setting and with great columns, and he does a lot of stuff to memorialize them. And he has similar strategy and strength in military as his brother. Judah, Sparta, and Rome, they hear of Jonathan's death. They write to Simon, and they renew their alliance with him, even greater than before, and with the people of Judah. And then even all of the people, they see Simon and what a leader he is. And in chapter 14, verse 25, they think to themselves, "How shall we thank Simon and his sons? For he and his brothers and the house of his father have stood firm. They have fought and repulsed Israel's enemies and established its freedom." So they make a record on bronze tablets and put it on pillars on Mount Zion. And they write this whole history of the wars, of how since Mattathias they had gone off and been faithful, and Judah Maccabee, what he did, and especially of Simon's faithfulness and the great that he did. And that's the all the way till verse 44. It goes on and continues with that. And so hear what it says towards the end of that. Starting in verse 41, "The Jews and their priests have resolved that Simon should be their leader and high priest forever." Remember that his father Mattathias, towards the beginning, in chapter 2, had killed someone, and the author had killed the Jew, the unfaithful Jew, who was apostatizing by offering sacrificing an unclean animal to an idol. And he kills the officer that was also an apostate Jew. And it says that his zeal burned like that of Phinehas. And remember that when Phinehas kills the unfaithful Israelites in front of, or sleeping with the Canaanites in front of the temple, that God grants him eternal priesthood. And now Simon, these Jews have written, I'm so sorry, can't talk, written on these bronze tablets that they put on pillars on Mount Zion. They wrote that their priests have resolved that Simon should be their leader and high priest forever. And again, here's that key word again, until a trustworthy prophet should arise. So, still establishing the Hasmonean Dynasty and priesthood forever, like Phinehas's, until the Messiah should come again, and that he should be governor over them, and that he should take charge of the sanctuary and appoint officials over its tasks and over the country and the weapons and the strongholds, and that he should take charge of the sanctuary, that he should be obeyed by all, and all the contracts in the country should be written in his name, and that he should be clothed in purple and wear gold. None of the people or the priests shall be permitted to nullify any of these decisions, or to oppose what he says, or to convene an assembly in the country without his permission, or to be clothed in purple or put on a gold buckle. Whoever acts contrary to these decisions or rejects any of them shall be liable to punishment. So they give this to Simon. They set it up. Anyways, at the end of it, it kind of ends with Antiochus, the son of King Demetrius, who sends a letter from the islands to Simon, the priest and the ethnarch of the Jews, and to all the nations. And he says that he is going to restore his kingdom as it formerly was, and that he's going to land in the country. He says he will free him from tax. He gives him he says that he can now mint his own coinage for money. And he grants him freedom to Jerusalem and all the sanctuary. Anyways, that just goes on. And that's part of Judea becoming independent under Simon. And this goes on. And Simon, he has two sons. So he goes to his sons and he tells them, let me find it. Okay, here at the beginning of chapter 16, he has his sons Judas and John, and he tells them that his brothers and I have fought the wars of Israel from our youth until this day, and things have prospered in our hands, so that we have delivered Israel many times. But now I have grown old, and you, by heaven's mercy, are mature in years. Take my place and my brothers, and go out and fight for our nation, and may the help that comes from heaven be with you. And so he tells that to his sons, and then he is unfortunately invited to go and meet with the king, and he is tragically taken and he is killed because the party was a trap, the party that he was invited to. But one of his sons, John, who's later going to be known as John Hyrcanus, he is not there at the party, and they intended to kill him too. But he gets messengers that tell him that that this King Ptolemaeus plans to kill him, and so he kills the people that are coming for him, and it just kind of ends here, saying that he went on to be the king, John Hyrcanus, and that the rest of the acts of John and his wars and the brave deeds that he did and the building of the walls that he completed and his achievements are written in the annals of his high priesthood from the time that he became high priest after his father. And that's the end. That's the very end of 1 Maccabees. It is a lot. It is expansive. And 2 Maccabees kind of focuses in on a certain time during that oppression, and it focuses on martyrdom. And that's what we will be getting into next week. But until then, thank you for listening. Make sure to give this podcast a good review if you like it, and share it, please. That would help a lot. But yeah, 1 Maccabees is an epic, intense telling of the most important history of historical moment, or rather era of the Second Temple, other than the coming of Jesus. And it has many implications for how the Jews would go on to think and hope for the Messiah who would come, which of course has a lot of say in the expectations for Jesus, and how Jesus does not fit in with those expectations. Jesus did not go around killing apostate Jews and killing Gentile oppressors. Instead, he allows the Gentile oppressors to destroy him and crush him and kill him on the cross when they are teamed up with Israel's leaders, who are the ones who are really running Israel into the ground. Jesus is hanging out, in fact, with, you can see why the Jewish leaders are so against the sinners, and wonder why Jesus hangs out with them. Because for them, the sinners and even the adulterers and people who worked on the Sabbath, these people, by their unfaithfulness, were dragging Israel into exile, and they hated Jesus for it. But Jesus was not the type of Messiah who would go around destroying his enemies through military power and strength. Rather, he allowed them to destroy him, and he rose from the grave to offer them a new way of living life. And that is just so much in contrast to 1 Maccabees, as awesome and as epic as the story is. But I am super excited for next week to go over 2 Maccabees. And until then, I will just see you in Babylonia.